Recording. Today is Tuesday, February the 26th, 2019. We are here at the Fairmount Heights Library, located in Fairmount Heights, Maryland, with Ed/Curtis and Tanya Taylor Morris, residents of the town of Fairmount Heights, Maryland. I am here to conduct an oral interview for the Sojourner Truth African American History Research Room Speak Your Truth Oral History Project. My name is LaDonna Smith at the Dream Lab at the Fairmount Heights Library. Mr. and Ms. Morris, welcome.
Thank you.
So tell me about being born and being from Fairmount Heights, Maryland.
Well, actually, we were both born in exactly the same hospital, several years apart. And in our memory, they have torn the hospital down and built an old folks home. So if the circle of life is true, we'll both end up back at that place before we go off. But I grew up in Fairmount Heights at 700 60th Avenue, house that my father built. And my father grew up at 5911 K Street. He and his 8 brothers and sisters grew up in that house. That was one that my grandfather and grandmother bought in 1910 when they moved out here. They built it for $2,500 and raised 9 kids in it. And that's next door to the Francis house. And Mr. Francis was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. And there are 4 Tuskegee Airmen from Fairmount Heights. We have very rich history with Tuskegee Institute. The electrician, Mr. Davis, John Davis, he electrified just about every house in the town. But he had on the side of his truck, John Davis, a Tuskegee craftsman, and I had no idea what that meant. But when I found out, I was impressed. And Joe Brett Animal Hospital up on Sheriff Road. Dr. Joe Barr and his wife were from Tuskegee Institute. And Joe was in the first graduating class from the Tuskegee Veterinary School. And he became one of the leaders of the African American Veterinary Society in the United States. And also a member of the Seafarers Yacht Club down in Annapolis. And he worked on everybody's dog in town. He got the first $5 that I ever made went to Joe Barr. And when I told him that, he said, that's probably helped me buy my boat, first boat. Yeah. And let me see, Portia was the daughter of the president of Tuskegee Institute. And they lived in a house on Eastern Avenue that was designed by her husband, who was an architect. He also designed the first African-American school, elementary school, on 60th Avenue, 61st Avenue in Addison Road. But that house that they had on Eastern Avenue always had a gangster lean to it. And when I was growing up, I always thought that that must be the house where the crooked man lived, because it was a crooked house. And Mr. Francis wrote a book called The Tuskegee Airmen. And before he wrote that book, the airmen were known as the Red Tails because of the red tails on the planes. But once he wrote that book, they became known as the Tuskegee Airmen. And he was a great guy. He had a son who was a sheriff, deputy sheriff in the county. Speaking of the constabulary, when we grew up, the town had a police department every now and then. They would come into existence and then disappear, and then be reborn because of the problem that we had with the Prince George's County Police Department. They rode roughshod over black inhabitants of the county. I've got some stories I can tell you about that. I will be writing something about several things. But growing up in Fairmount Heights, we thought, we didn't know anything about people being rich or poor. We were just happy. And we had different groups. I wouldn't call them gangs. It's just based on an area where you lived, and we interacted, sometimes positively and sometimes throwing rocks at each other. Usually it was with baseball or football. You could play whole baseball or football game in the street all day long, and not be bothered by traffic because nobody had any cars.
And it was a farm.
It had been 5 farms, one of which was owned by a farmer named McDonald. I always thought that was cute. But the houses in town, whenever anybody was working on a house, they didn't hire a contractor. They would build the house, and the neighbors would help them. In the evenings, on weekends, whoever had a house coming out of the ground, they would work on it. And I remember Mr. Prather was building his house on 60th Avenue, and this was before they had front-end loaders. So the only way you could get anything dug, a basement dug out, was either by hand, which we did. The kids in the neighborhood dug out the basement for the apartment, 701 59th place. But Mr. Prather, he took it up a notch, and he hired a mule team to come in. And he did his in the wintertime. Charlie and Gracie, when they built the gas station up here, they went into that hill with the same thing, a mule team. And they had 2 guys behind the mule. They'd pick the sled up and slam it into the clay and pull the handles down, and then somebody would whip the mule, and the mule would rear up. And it would take them about a week to dig out enough for a basement. But we dug the basement for that apartment, 30 by 30 foot, and the kids, and my father paid us, I think we got maybe 75 cents, but that was big money. And at that time, Sea Pleasant was, I would say, predominantly white, but it was all white. And they didn't take kindly to us coming over to Sea Pleasant to play. The guys in Cheverly didn't take too kindly to us either, but we laid for them a couple times. But it wasn't anything where anybody could get hurt, unless they got hit in the head with one of the rocks we were throwing. And I remember Skippy Adams, somebody told him that white boys couldn't fight. And he went down by Casey Drug Store one day, and Skip could fight. And he waited for the junior high school to get out and let the kids walk past him, and he picked out the biggest white boy he could find and just walked up to him and popped him in the face. And he found out that some white boys could fight. But Skip went in the Army, he retired. He's up in Philadelphia now. Runs he was a mechanic, auto repair and tow company.
He lived across the street.
He lived across the street from where we grew up. Yeah. He had a great family, the Adams family. That wasn't meant as a joke. Skip and Alvin, Zip. Zip went in the Marines. We had quite a few guys who did quite a bit in this town. And we had a Rhodes Scholar. The first person to get to graduate from Harvard Business School grew up right next door to us. And her sister, the first day I met her, when they moved into the house.
This is the Middleton sisters.
The Middleton sisters, yes. I met Lavinia. She was 4 years old, and I remember standing in the driveway, and she was up inside the house on the other side of the porch. And I went there to meet her family, and she introduced herself, and we carried on a conversation. And it was like talking to an adult. And I went home, and I can't remember if I told Tanya or not, but the thought that went through my mind was, this child is so brilliant, she'll probably end up finding the cure for cancer. That's what hit me, like that. She is now at the Anderson Cancer Institute in Houston, Texas. Okay.
Amazing.
And she is a nationally, if not internationally renowned breast cancer specialist.
Getting ahead of yourself, but let's
Yes.
go back.
Okay, yeah.
Back to the apartment.
Oh, the apartment, yeah. Well, when we grew up, the kids would, You get a pair of roller skates, you ride on the roller skates on the only sidewalk in town, which was right in front of my father's house. He built that, and Mr. West convinced him to put coal ashes in it, which wasn't the best idea in concrete, but he thought it was a good idea. But we would roller skate, and then the roller skates would wear out, and we'd make skateboards, real skateboards. You take the front of the skate, put it on the front, and the back of the skate, and nail it to the back, and you put a handle on it and try to roll. But when we grew up, there were no sidewalks, no pavement. There was asphalt that they would throw off the back of the truck and gravel. And we couldn't wait till summertime so you could walk around barefoot. That was great, running around playing barefoot, not wearing out your shoes because you only got one pair of shoes a year. And in the summertime, when the sun would beat down on the asphalt, it would get hot and bubble up. And if you ran across the street in your bare feet, hit that hot tar, it would light you up. Sometimes you get hot enough to put a blister on the bottom. But when they built the monument, there were some Italian brick masons, stone masons, who built it. And we were just watching them. We asked them what they were doing. They said they were building a tomb and putting dead people inside of it. It scared the heck out of us. And there was a bridge on 59th Avenue, right in front of Duke Marshall's house, right by the monument, where the stream used to run through there.
Field Street. Right, Field Street?
Yeah, well, other side, yeah, near. And we would crawl through the culvert, we'd catch tadpoles and crawl through the culvert when it was dry. And when it got wet, when it rained, we would have a swimming pool on 60th Avenue. The culvert couldn't handle the water, and if a big rain came, it would be like 1.5 feet deep. And it would stay that way until it drained off. So we would just run down there and jump in the water and swim. Not swim, just splash around.
Tell me stories about how you and your boys had that clubhouse that you built.
Yeah. They tore a house down up on 60th Avenue, and we went up there, and you can't find this kind of wood anymore. They were 20-foot 2x4s. And so nobody was looking at them, so we picked them up and walked back down the street with 4 of them, and we built a prefabricated 3-story tower and laid it on the ground, and the plan was to throw a rope up over a tree and pull it up. And we got everything set up, but we weren't strong enough to pull it up. So my father came home and saw it and broke out laughing, and he helped us build this tower. So we dug some holes and put the boards in and got them level, and then we built it. It was 3 stories tall, and it withstood a hurricane, Hazel. It withstood a hurricane. And the next year, my father was cutting down a tree. He was trimming a tree in our yard, and we looked, and there was a branch that he cut off, and it was a big Y, maybe about 6 feet tall. And first thing that came to my mind was slingshot. Big slingshot. So we dug a hole and stuck it down in the ground and got an inner tube from a bicycle tire and nailed it on. And we took a red brick and put in it, and Jimmy West and I grabbed the brick, pulled it down, put it on the ground, and counted to 3 and let go, and it flew and hit the side of the apartment. Thank God it didn't hit a window, because I probably wouldn't be here talking to you right now. But it couldn't shoot a whole brick, but it could shoot a half a brick. And we shot a half a brick over the house, over the apartment.
You have to tell about the house that it disturbed.
The house that it disturbed was occupied by a family that had some illicit activity going on. And when that brick, we did about 2 or 3 times and decided we better stop because it'd be pretty obvious who was doing it. But when it hit, it took a while for the sound to come around the building to us. But it broke shingles off the house, and the customers in the house started screaming, cussing, and running. Yeah, that was something. That was Mr. Galloway's house. And Mr. Galloway lived in that house for some time, and somehow or another he lost it. and he moved into a shed that he had over next to the Nicholas House on 59th Avenue. And he had a garden in front. I'll go back to gardens in a minute. But he told folks that when he was living in that house, he had hidden $10,000 in the wall somewhere, but he forgot where he hid it. And when the people moved out of that house, they'd torn it to pieces, ripped the walls out, looking for $10,000. And Mr. Galloway was just blowing smoke. But Mr. Galloway, the shed that he was living in caught fire. And he was very, very badly burned. And when he came back to town, he had no place to live. So my father subdivided the garage and put a pot-bellied stove in there, and he lived in the back court of the garage. And we'd have to go down, and my brother and I, to get coal every day because we had coal furnace. And we'd have to go down and get 2 buckets of coal apiece and haul it back up. And as the coal went down, the dust would come up, so you had to cover your mouth to get coal. And my father would set a coal fire at night, and in the morning we'd wake up hearing him building a new coal fire because the whole house would be cold because the fire would die. And then we'd hear him down there balling up newspapers and getting the fire started. And within about 15 minutes, you could feel that warmth coming up. And I'd wake up sometimes, and my eyes would be stuck shut from the stuff in your eye, whatever it is, like glue, like that. And I had to get up and find my way to the bathroom and run hot water to get bathrooms. We had a bunch of outhouses in town. And we had 3 outhouses as late as the mid-1960s. There were still 3 outhouses. But people would build a house. They would start by building a basement, and then as they got their money together, then they'd go up with it. Well, there were 1, 2, 3, 4 of them that never got a top on them. They were just a basement, and people lived in the basement. And then they died, the kids didn't want it, the place went rack and ruin, just knocked down. And there was one house I went past the other day to look for it. It was just a quarter of a house. It had 2 rooms. And it stood there for years on 59th Avenue. But anytime somebody, I remember when I was in high school hearing Mr. and Mrs. Crusoe talking about people in the town. Somebody did a study and found out that Census did a study and found that there were people in this town whose annual income was 0. They had no job, there was no Social Security, they had no money coming in, but they did not miss a meal. My mother cooked dinner for us every day, but we always had to carry a meal down to Mr. Galloway. And then my uncle, he had chickens, he got rid of his chickens and cleaned up the chicken coop, and it was just sitting there, and it was better, the chicken coop was better than living in part of a garage with us down there shoveling coal and my father moving paint buckets around. So he insulated the chicken coop, and Mr. Galloway moved in there. And he lived there till he died. Yeah. Yeah, when Mr. Galloway died, and he went blind before he died. And he paid a kid in the neighborhood to lead him down to the Jumbo store, which I thought was the most beautiful store in the world. The most beautiful building I'd ever seen was the Jumbo. And right across from the Safeway. And it had put all the stores out of business in town. There were, I can't count the number of stores, but I am counting them. I've got the addresses. I'll tell you exactly where they were and who ran them. Okay?
In town.
In town.
In the town.
We had, God knows how many grocery stores. And people couldn't afford to pay when they went and bought stuff. So they would have little composition books and keep track of, and it wasn't alphabetical. They just knew which page you were on. And I couldn't wait to get my own page at Brooks' store, one of your relatives, okay? But they would just keep track of it, and at the end of the week you pay. And my father had a grocery store. He ran a grocery store for a while. And my brother has the book. And he was charging his mother was charging stuff. And he would, but anyway, but you could buy anything in this town. Fresh fish, meats, fresh meat, fresh butchered meat, vegetables, candy. That's what we were interested in, candy and sodas and Hostess cupcakes. That was it. But
Still
Brooks' store, barber store, rental store, where this building is right here was Kaufman's. It was owned by a Jewish merchant. And directly across the street where that other little store is, Catty Corner, I don't remember their name because we couldn't go across Addison Road. Okay, so we just never went in that store. But Kaufman's was the first time I ever had a dill pickle was in Kaufman's. And Kaufman, of all the people who went to the Second World War, including 4 Tuskegee Airmen, the only person who was killed in the Second World War was Mr. Kaufman's son. So the white guy was the only one that died. And while we had 2 pilots, 2 or 3, 84, flying out of Tuskegee, Kaufman's son was training to fly in North Carolina, is what I heard. And he flew into a fog bank and ran into a mountain in training. And the only person who was wounded that I'm aware of is my Uncle Arthur, and he had his right arm blown off during the Normandy invasion. The story I heard was that he was trying to pull his friend's head down. He was looking up, and whatever round killed his friend shot his head off, took his hand off, and then they had to cut his arm off. But I had 4 uncles who served in the Second World War. And Jordan, Edward Jordan, got the panels off of the old monument ramp. I found one on the ground one day. Mr. Hines made that. And, I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but Mr. Hines, he and his wife Pauline, they didn't have any kids, but they were parents to everybody in the neighborhood. And he taught us how to...
Every generation, including mine.
Yeah, archery, shuffleboard. He and his wife went to exotic places like Bermuda. And he'd have a 4th of July party and invite people from Bermuda there, and they had these beautiful accents. And taught us all kinds of stuff. And he could cook. And he introduced us.
That's how we met. You know, his children were older by then, so we were adults. And as usual, he was hosting something for neighbors to come in to eat. And that's when I met his sister, who I thought was one of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. And she had on long white boots, had long hair, and as nice as anyone could be, which was such a pleasure, because often you see someone who is very attractive who doesn't have the same personality. So she asked if I'd like to meet her brother, and they lived around the corner. I'd never seen them. I was so busy going to school. You know, I'd go and come and go and come. I didn't get to know the neighbors. My dad was an attorney at the time, but he had not made a lot of friends with the neighbors. The house used to be the office. And so I said, sure. Yeah, sure. And that's how that garage became famous in our house.
Yeah,
Here is this man.
Yeah, we got to get a
plaque.
A plaque put on it.
Here is
You're
this
joking, but I'm
man
gonna do it.
down under a car.
Yeah.
And my parents had brought me up to be, to meet a suitcase man. That's what I used to.
That's traffic salesman.
No, someone with a briefcase. And here's this guy in a full jumpsuit underneath a car. And so I said, oh my goodness. And he asked me out. And I said yes. And so that was a Saturday. He said, well, what about next Saturday? And I said, well, sure. And then he called me from the middle of the week from Atlanta to make sure our date was on. That's impressive.
That's long
One
distance.
that he called, but you don't remember, long distance cost money then. So I was totally impressed. His whole family, that's what I saw was, they were WYSIWYGs. What you saw is what you got. They were all so nice. And then all of a sudden, I became aware of the neighborhood. I met him in January. We decided March was too soon to get married because it was seeming precipitous. So we waited till May. Yeah.
The job that I had was going to take me out of town. So, we had a choice of either going to Texas or New York. And she didn't want to go to Texas.
They want to go south.
So, and I got stories about that. But then she said New York. I think she was thinking New York City. We ended up in Albany.
The armpit of the world.
At that time, Albany had about 200,000 people, and it was losing people every day. Anybody who could get bus fare was getting out of Albany. And we were moving.
It was terrible. Live entertainment was boxing. Yeah, really, really bad.
But we moved. We only stayed up there a year. I begged my way out of that one and came back to Fairmount Heights. And then we stayed, I guess, for 5 years.
Yeah, and that's when Fairmount Heights became real to me. I lived there, going to school for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and didn't really know anyone, not even my neighbors. And after we were married, going to and fro, I met Mrs. Brooks. Well, Mrs. Brooks had a stroke, and we thought she was dying. Everybody told me, Mrs. Brooks, she's had a stroke. She's just not going to make it. But Mrs. Brooks would walk up and down that street, and she lasted another 40 years. She was a strong woman and wrote the columns beautifully, and wrote to everyone whenever anything happened. She was just very conscious of every person in the town. She had an open heart. And my next door neighbor, Mrs. Butler, so many stories. She used to be an elevator operator when you had those metal doors and the elevators had to be operated. And she had many stories. And I got to know her, and she became like family. And then across the street, we lived across the street from a parsonage, and we met many ministers, and some of them so interesting. The most notable was Ralph Whitehead, who came and went in a flash, but he had such a beautiful person about him that he remains in our life forever. He was there so short a time. It makes me cry when I think about it. And then there was the empty lot where the Adams had lived. Well, they might as well live there because there were so many stories about them as boys. And and sometimes he was with Alvin, most of the time it was Skip, and just stories about Mr. Adams.
Yeah.
Just
we built a clubhouse one time, and we built a frame for it, and we were trying to figure what we would put on the outside, and started putting wood on it to keep it from falling over. And Skip said that his father had some corrugated tin in the backyard. So we went up through the alley and got the tin, came down and put the thing together. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Adams was looking for his tin, couldn't find it. And we moved away to Texas and came back, and I walked across the street one day and confessed to Mr. Adams that we'd stolen his tin. And he just shook his head.
And then there was the Crusoe house.
Yeah.
And Mr. Crusoe. Well, for me, it's Mr. Cardinal. I never could understand.
Oh, no.
That's Grant.
No. That was next to Cardinal. That was not Crusoe. That was Pop Holmes.
Holmes. The Holmes. That's right, Pop Holmes. You know, so he was to me a fascinating person because I would try to talk to him. So I figured at some point I would understand what he was saying. At some point. And I never did, but he's always smiling and he was always nice.
Pop Holmes was from South Carolina, spoke Geechee, and I'd go over there and we'd just sit there, and I'd sit there with him for about a half hour, 45 minutes. But first 15 minutes I couldn't understand anything he was saying. And after a while, I would get in with his lilt, and I could pick up maybe 85%. But he had some of the funniest stories, and he'd be sitting over there mixing concrete in a 5-gallon bucket. And I asked him what he was doing, because he was always mixing concrete. And he let me know that he was afraid of fire. And he took me into his bedroom. And he had cut out about this much of the plaster all the way around his room. And he was filling it. Every day he'd go in there and dump a bucket of concrete in there and fill it up, because he didn't want his room to catch fire with him in it, sleeping. And one day, Cardinal Crusoe's son, Cardinal, was, the pipes froze in Mr. Holmes' house. And little Cardinal, he was grown, but he used a torch to loosen up the water, to melt the ice inside the pipes. And he had a bucket of water and a rag, and he was, every time something would catch fire, he'd put it out. And he missed a couple of sparks, and it ran up the insulation. And when he left, everything was fine, and the water was running. But about a half hour after he left, the place caught fire. But Pop Holmes got out of it. He got out of it.
Worst nightmare. You know,
Yes.
Sometimes you hear these stories and you think somebody knows something. You know, I just always wondered, you know, why things happen for a reason. So we're going up the street, and then by the time we were there, there was a store. There was always a store of some sort. Well, Brooks' store was across the street.
Oh, Reynolds.
Where it was Reynolds, but then we had the upholstery people.
Yeah.
That came in.
Franklin.
Yeah, so we had an upholstery shop on the corner for a long time, and right across from there was Mr. Brooks' store, and that was active for years. You know, when I first came there, we didn't have kids for 5 years, so the neighborhood kids became our kids. You know, and it was a time when I used to go out and I would lay in a hammock in the yard. Our yard had 5 lots. Now, it's a house that has, you know, historic beginnings. It was the biggest house with the most. The Trammels built it, and Mr. Trammell worked in the White House, or was he the Pope? Who worked in the White House?
He worked in the government somewhere, I don't know, but
he had a good government job, and so he built a house just like he'd seen, only smaller. And so the house had a back stairway, you know, electricity everywhere, had a basement that they fitted out to a pine. Remember when knotty pine was all the thing? They had a
Mr. Lewis put the knotty pine pan in.
slot machine, and in the basement, and a bar, full-on bar. It was the coolest house when I first moved in there. And, you know, you just looked, we had a lot of parties. It looked like so much fun. And so once we got in there, you know what, they always change everything. So we were always working on the house, and we had lots of kids in and out. And then we had our kids. And, you know, we went to Texas and ended up having our kids in Texas. But when we came back, now we had kids for the neighborhood kids, you know, and so Jackie Woods had twins, which were about the same age as my kids, Rakia, and the boys and girls played together when they were really little, but we decided we were going to build a little clubhouse for them, for the girls, Erica and Sharissa. And so the whole neighborhood came in to help us paint it. And Jackie's daughter, the twin, Rakia was helping, and it was a shed actually. We built a shed, but we put this big plexiglass window in it because we're thinking 2 girls having a clubhouse, a shed, not happening. we had plexiglass all over the place. So the kids really were excited about it, and they wanted to paint it. And we gave everybody a paintbrush. Well, if you've never painted, you're really not sure how you're doing it. Next thing I knew, I heard screaming, and her Kia was running it, got paint in her eyes, and all around the neighborhood. It was just, when you think about the things that happened, next door where Curtis was talking about Lavinia, there were 3 girls, and their father, and their mother, and it was a small house, and he told me tons of stories about the people that used to live in that house. But when the Middletons moved in, Lorenzo was a chef and had done many things. And he owned
That he managed the chef's table.
the chef's table,
Yeah,
which we
very
knew
well.
about. And then, he would tell us secrets. But he also, like every other person in the town, could do lots of things. And so he helped us to build our kitchen, to remodel our kitchen. Yeah. And the girls were in and out of the house. We used to leave it. I started telling you about laying out in the hammock. We left our door open. We only locked it at night when we went up to bed. Door was always unlocked. The kids coming in and out for years and years.
When we were growing up, nobody ever locked the door. Some houses didn't have locks on the door.
But this is the 70s, 70s and 80s. It's, considered at the time modern times. Now looking back.
But one of the things when we moved down here from Albany, just the 2 of us, and Halloween would come, and we had a vestibule, so we would rig up the doors with string, and
no, we started before the girls.
Yeah, started before the girls, and we would
kids.
Just open the doors with the string and scare the kids and everything.
Wait, it was a little more than that.
Yeah.
We took furniture out the room. We put in a coffin.
That was later. Yeah,
we
built
covered
the coffin,
all the furniture.
Yeah, covered the furniture in sheets and
all my
black
cousins.
lights and what do you call it, liquid nitrogen?
Yeah. So there was smoke all over the floor. Yeah. And we would invite my cousins over, one of whom was 6'4", and his girlfriend was about 5'2", so he would put her on his shoulders, and he was so strong. He would kneel and then stand up with her on his shoulders. So, of course, it's 7 feet.
Yeah, but
kids were so scared. One little boy was laying flat on the floor running.
Yeah.
He was
swimming.
Trying to. No, he was running, but he was laying there crying.
But we would always end up with more candy than we started.
Yep. He would lay in the coffin.
Yeah, I'd lay in the coffin, and if you wanted candy, you had to get it from me.
Tell them what you had on.
I had on a clown mask, and when they came over, I would pull the clown mask off, and I was like Dracula with green fangs and everything. And we had the black lights, so everything would glow in the dark,
And then we had the back steps. Remember?
We had the back steps. When we were there by ourselves, I would scare them at first, and then run up the stairs and run down the back stairs.
So you were one place one time,
or run up the
back
back stairs and come down the front and jump out and scare them.
So they didn't know what to expect. We scared so many. It was so fun that we had people coming from Mitchellville, up to this haunted house.
Parker. Joe Parker brought 2 station wagons full of kids. We had 100 kids out in front.
Joe Parker used to live in the town. Moved out to the big house in Mitchellville, in the estates. What was it? Enterprise Estates. Oh, he's so proud, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he brought those kids back home to a place that he knew about. And now I lost my train of thought. We were talking about the
Joe Parker.
And we talked about the Tremor House and going up the back steps.
It'll come to you.
Sometime.
Yeah. But the town, we used to make wagons, and Pete,
going back to when you were a kid.
When I was a kid, yeah. Pete made a wagon, and it was the fastest wagon in town, and we couldn't figure out why it was so fast. And he finally fessed up that he'd stolen 2 of the hand carts from Safeway store, and the wheels had ball bearings in them, and he was beating everybody. And I hadn't seen a kid make a wagon in so long, it was a shame. And one day I actually saw a kid, maybe when Erica and Sharice were little, one kid in town made a wagon. But bicycles, we would ride bicycles everywhere. And the big guys, the big kids they would go down to the junkyard. There was a dump down at the end of Nanny Helen Burroughs, all straight down. And it's a park down there now, but it used to be a dump. And they would come home with some of the most magnificent things I'd ever seen. It was junk. And we finally got to go down there one day, got a wagon, walked all the way down, and picked our way through this junk that people were throwing away, finding stuff that looked interesting, putting it on the wagon, and then we had to haul it all the way home and realize that all we had was junk.
I do that now, so seemed like a good thing at the time.
Seemed like a good, but we only made that trip one time.
So after we had the kids, actually, before we became involved in the town. My dad had been a lawyer for Mr. Mizell, and he had a firm. Now, in Prince George's County, there were 6 black attorneys that were practicing. In D.C., maybe 1,000, 10,000. But in Prince George's County, you couldn't make a living, like many places. And my dad was a very determined person. When he was young, he had a million different jobs trying to make a buck. His dad had died when he was little, and his mom was trying to make it through life, and they lived in Elbridge, Maryland, and so the family lived in that area, and it turned out they lived in a floodplain. While they were growing up, my father lived with my grandfather and grandmother, and it was a harsh life for him because apparently my grandfather was not a very nice person. And so he determined when he was 16 that he was done. He was going to go ride the trains. He just was fascinated with anything with wheels. That never went away. So he joined a train. He wanted to be an engineer, but they had him shoveling coal. Well, my dad was an extremely intelligent person, and he never thought that he would have to do this. So he came back home, got his GED, went to Howard, got his degree, and then he went in the first class that accepted black students at American University. Law school. And so once he graduated from law school, during the war, he was working in the passport office. And I bring you to that because my neighbor across the street currently is the daughter of someone he worked with. Washington was a very small town at that time. I mean, everybody knew everybody else, and just in the same circles. So he came to Prince George's County, and he met Franklin Bourne. Franklin Bourne had his office in D.C. at first, and he took my dad under his wing. My dad never forgot that. And then they moved out to Fairmount Heights in the what's now called the Trammell Taylor House. And they had an office. And it was upstairs. I mean, the whole office was really very nice. I used to visit because I lived with my mom in D.C. And I'm actually an 8th generation Washingtonian, transplanted to Prince George's County. And so they did very well. And then they moved to what was a more central office on Roosevelt Avenue, which is now Martin Luther King Avenue, in Sea Pleasant. And all of the attorneys, save one, became judges. My father, it started this way. When my father was in Prince George's County, he got to know a state's attorney. And he made the decision that things had to change.
Bud Marshall.
Bud Marshall. And so my father was the first black appointed as an assistant state's attorney. And that started his trailblazing.
But Bud Marshall also, along with JT, he hired the first Jewish assistant state's attorney and the first Italian assistant state's attorney.
It was a very, very blonde establishment. You know, no differences allowed. And that's what we knew about Prince George's County. It was a very rural county. When we were there, even law office, there were no streets. There were no sidewalks in Fairmount Heights, and that was the 70s. You know, so and Prince George's was rural as well. So the streets were very small. Martin Luther King was a very small highway.
2 lanes.
So there were
Sure,
big
roads.
changes coming, you know, and politically and physically for Prince George's County. But you couldn't make a buck. My dad couldn't eat in the restaurants. They had to go to the back of a pool hall. No blacks allowed.
Yeah,
So
that was when I was 12 years old. Miss Crusoe took us down to Upper Marlboro because Jimmy Mizell was trying to get at 717 61st Avenue. He had a store, and he bought it from Mr. Steele, and he wanted to get a liquor license. And your father was representing him. I'd heard about your father, but I'd never met him, never seen him. And Mrs. Crusoe, Mr. Crusoe, they got us together and took a bunch of kids down to the courthouse. First time I'd ever been to Upper Marlboro. I thought I was going somewhere. And Upper Marlboro was ruled by 5 white families. The Claggets were one, the Sassers, a couple of us, but they mistreated people horribly. But when lunchtime came, we went to a little drugstore on Main Street and went in. There was Mrs. Crusoe and Mrs. Pope and a bunch of kids. All of us go in there, and the lady said, "Can't eat in here." And this was in the 50s, deep into the 50s. And there was a guy, I've got his name, he ran a pool hall right where the jail is right now, up on the hill. And about 11:30, he started throwing hot dogs in a pot of water because he knew hot dogs and white bread, all the blacks that came to Upper Marlboro would be eaten in his place. He knew.
So change was coming, you know, and to this day, my dad appreciated Bud Marshall. And my father had a protege, Alex Williams. He was his first clerk. And there came a time when Bud and Alex were running against each other. And my father loved Alex dearly, but he couldn't forsake Bud. He said if it wasn't for him, Alex wouldn't be there. And so he had to make a choice that a lot of people didn't understand. My dad was a very loyal person. He was known as the gentleman's gentleman. You know, his language, his comportment, all bespoke, you know, a well-learned gentleman. And in fact, that's how people saw him. They never knew what he was doing. And they did I'm sorry, I'm jumping too. They did a tribute to him as a trailblazer when he was, I think, about 75. 75 years trailblazer. And one of the judges, I can't remember which one, got up. He said, you know, we used to go with, and they called him Jimmy, which I find astounding because he didn't like that name. He was either, you know, James or my family's family called him James Harold. My mother called him Jim. Not very many people called him Jim. But I said, you know, we used to go to New York with Jimmy for these conferences. And he'd go to the conference, but then he would leave. And I'd give every dollar in my pocket if I could just figure out where he went, because he was so happy when he came back. They had different lives, even though things were changing, and they were very good friends. Life changes very, very slowly, and his life was very separate from theirs, even though their daytime life was intertwined. Eventually, we saw the difference, in his acquaintanceship with the judges and their wives. And my dad married, my mom and dad divorced when I was about 9. So he married a wonderful woman, my stepmom, Jan. And just by the interaction as family members, things changed again. And so then people actually became friends, had social lives outside of the job, which just wasn't happening before. So we were in Fairmount Heights, and I moved in after he moved out to go to school. And as I said, I never saw anyone. And then after we got married, we were gone a year and came back. And it was a whole new world. All of a sudden, this place that had just been a place to sleep now had Technicolor characters. And I would just walking down the street to see his mom, who was the best mother-in-law ever. She was the sweetest, most loving woman you would ever meet. His father was salty. No, not salty wouldn't get it. What's the word you use for your dad?
Vinegar.
She was sugar. He was a little vinegary. And so we would walk down, and he's talked to you about, this was their corner. The house on 60th and Field, well, it was Field then, was a duplex. And then they had the yard coming over on that street, and then the apartment. So that corner of that block was the Morris corner. And in the on the top floor, his brother and brother Warren, his wife lived. And then on the first floor, his sister Merla and her son David lived. And in the basement, mostly was empty. It was used, different people used it every now and again, but it was mostly empty. So I would walk down, because here's this wonderful family. I could visit so many people just walking. But as I walked down, I saw Mr. Hines and stuff, because that's what they call Pauline Hines, stuff. And then I walked down, I see Mrs. Brooks, and she was sitting on her porch in a rocking chair often. So of course you had to stop and see her, and she had all of her beautiful irises that she just built this garden forever. And then you walk down a little further, and I don't know who was between. I remember Mr. and Mrs. Marshall. I think there was a house in between, but I don't remember them. And then there was a little shotgun house. But then I'm already turning the corner to go up to the house. And then there was the pink house. It was a 1-story pink house, which I found amazing, because it was a modern house in an ancient town. Because everything was hand-built.
Yeah, that house stole our playground. That was our field, and then they built that house.
So going up and down the street, it became so comfortable. And every now and then I walk up to Brooks, and I can't remember why I would walk up the other way, even though I know your Uncle Charlie used to live up the street, the biggest bathroom in town, biggest bathtub in town. And then I got involved with the town, with the Positive Youth Development Center. And Verna Watkins was the director. And we had a wonderful time working with kids in the town. I didn't have kids at first, and so all the kids in the town were my kids. And the children, we took them places, we did things with them. And this is how we decided that we needed to do something for them. And I got involved. He was already involved with the town council. And so I got on the Citizens Association. And sometimes we would be in meetings. And, you know, I married this man because I loved him, you know, admired him. Didn't always agree with him. And so at the meeting, we would have sometimes opposing ideas. And people said, how do you all live together? Well, yeah, we're just talking about issues here. It doesn't work that way. And sometimes, after the kids, I became a member of the council. And he was on the Civic Association. So we changed our positions. It was interesting. You know, the town was everything. It became our passion. We decided not to move. You know, there are many opportunities, but truly we believe that if kids could see their neighbors, people they know, succeeding, then they would feel that it was possible. And we know it's true. You know, I got to know all of the kids in the neighborhood, first through different things that we were doing. Then once the kids were born, you know, all these kids became their friends. Chris Black, you know, right behind us, he still is in contact with Erica and Sharissa and Alice. The Middletons. Alice ended up going to Harvard Law. She had a full ride to Columbia with a fellowship, and no matter how hard we talked to her, she wanted that. That tag. You know, she wanted a Harvard MBA, and she got it. And we talked about Lavinia, you know, who is now, you know, oncologist. And Dina was working in Virginia in the medical field. So, and then up the street, there's a young man, and I can't think of his name, but he actually came back to us.
Oh, Marshall.
Yes.
Yeah, his last name is Marshall.
Came back to us and said that he knew he could be somebody. And it was the most rewarding thing because it wasn't easy. I mean, so many of our friends, remember we were talking about how Joe moved out to, you know, to the States. You know, so many of our friends were, you know, we're going uptown. What's the name of that song? And moving on up. And, you know, we stayed there because, you know, we felt we could make a difference. And sometimes it felt great, but sometimes it didn't, you know. And then as our children aged out of the neighborhood and went to college, those last couple of years, the neighborhood started changing. We started talking about across the street, but on this side of the street, you know, I introduced you to the Middletons, but then there was Mrs. Phillips of the Daylilies. Mrs. Phillips had a beautiful yard. Mr. Phillips had died before I ever met him, and Curtis will tell you the story about Mr. Phillips. But I met Mrs. Phillips, and she scared every kid in the neighborhood. Everybody was afraid of Mrs. Phillips. I was never a kid in the neighborhood, so I was an adult. We were great friends. But I would talk to other people, what? Mrs. Phillips? You all are friends? And she was a lovely person, and she and I had a love of flowers. And then the next house was Fran, the police officer,
Barnes.
Fran Barnes, and his stepdaughter, who is now on the council, the county council. So, you know, as you're walking down, and then there was another man, and I never knew his name, but he was one of the only of 2 or 3 people who ever got from mosquitoes. What was the Nile? West Nile disease. He actually died from West Nile disease. You know, most people survived that. You know, it was a big scare, you know, back in the 90s. But he was the only person we ever knew that died from it. So Fairmount Heights was a wonderful family. Then Mrs. Butler died. and then Mrs. Phillips died. They started dying out. Now, the newer families came in, but they were not so established in the town. And then newer families that we didn't know. And then my children were gone. And then one of their friends was killed, a drive-by. And it just...
61st.
The town was becoming a stranger. I was driving up the street. You know how kids get in a fight and then they gather around them? So I'm driving up the street and there's a fight. So I jump out the car like I always would. And I waited in there. I said, all right, that's enough. You know, you have to stop this. You know, you cannot continue. Just like that. And they stopped. And I looked around. Not one familiar face. It's amazing. I got in the car and just sat there like this. Because they were all taller than I am. Kids are tall these days. And I thought, wow, this isn't my town anymore. You know, times have changed. And all the parents were working. You know, and all the kids were home alone. Everything had changed. Grandmothers weren't there. You know. So Fairmount Heights has a long and wonderful history of families. You hear Curtis talking about this family and that family, and I've just been talking about my street. You know, if I go further over, you know, to 60th Avenue, you know, because the town hall was there, the old town hall. So then you're there and you're walking between the town hall and that little building they bought, you know, for as a town interim town hall while they were trying to fix the old town hall, and that's where the Positive Youth Development Center was. So we got to know the people in the church across the street from there, and you know, of course, the Rojas, they knew them forever, and just, you know, they were just, you got to know everybody.
Yeah, the Rojas family, the Smith family in that house where Rojas had his opticians lab.
The shop in the back.
The Smiths, Mrs. Smith was from the Dominican Republic, and they would throw parties before integration. The Hispanic diplomats from Central and South America and the Caribbean, there was no place for them to go. So the Smiths would throw parties out there, and half the diplomatic corps in D.C. was at their house. And the party would start on a Friday night and not end until Sunday evening.
Before my time.
Yeah, and I always wanted to go to one of these parties because they party. And
how old were you then?
I was like 16.
Way before my time.
Yeah, and when I became 18, I got invited to one of the parties. And I went there on a Friday night, and they were partying and dancing and everything and drinking, and I got tired, so I went home. And next day, I was just wondering whether they were still partying, and I went around there, and they were. These old people were still
25
dancing
and
and
30-year-old people.
Yeah, no, they were old. And but the Smiths, they used to have the names of their children on the front steps, and there were like 8 of them. And one of them had been in the military, and Mrs. Smith was showing me his picture. Carlos showed me his picture, and I'm looking for Carlos in this platoon thing, and he was the platoon leader. And I said, well, if you're going to go in there, that's the way to go in there. And I asked about it, and I spoke to him, and he said, go in ROTC. So I did, went to ROTC. If you're going to go in the military, go to ROTC. But you mentioned Mrs. Brooks, and nobody mentioned Mr. Brooks. Now, Lawrence Brooks, when he came back from the military, he added the second floor on the bungalow where Carlotta lives. He added that.
Which is on the corner
on
of
the corner
59th
and J. Right. And he became mayor. And he was mayor when the street project started. He negotiated a loan for the town from HUD. Went up to Philadelphia to the regional office and got this loan. And then he left office, and Mayor Davis, Charles Davis, came in. And but let me finish. Hold that thought. Lawrence Brooks, when he left being mayor, he became the first black commissioner on WSSC, Washington Suburban Sanitation Commission. And within 3 years, he was chairman of the commission. And Lawrence Brooks got work for a lot of people in Fairmount Heights, Cedar Heights, Seat Pleasant, Chapel Oaks, that would not have been able to find work with WSSC until he got on it. I mentioned the Smiths. My head jumped. Well, I made it the Victory Gardens. After the Second World War, people would plant gardens. Victory Gardens. That was a national program. They had Victory Gardens to grow food to eat. And everybody in town had these Victory Gardens. Everywhere you went. All kinds of food. And my father had one where the apartment is. And when he was planting stuff, a guy came past there and asked him, went in his pocket and said, plant these for me. And pulled some seeds out of his pocket. And my father planted them. And end of the summer, the plant grew up. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. It was a cotton plant. He had cotton seeds. And we went in and tried to get the cotton boll out. Have you ever done that? You don't want to do it. Picking cotton is torture because the boll pops open and each one of the little, it's a shell like a nut.
Like a petal.
And it's sharp on the ends, and the sharp thing goes up under your fingernails. It's horrible. I can't imagine that. I have a friend who used to pick cotton in Mississippi. And he said he never wants to see another cotton plant as long as he lives.
I have another friend, said the same, used to pick cotton for her grandmother. Exact same thing. It was horrific.
But when we were growing up, there were a bunch of fruit trees in town. Everybody had fruit trees. Mr. Hines had fruit trees. My father had cherry trees. There were apple trees, mulberry trees. And my grandfather had pear trees, apple trees, a grape arbor, all kinds of fruit. And
we had
it up in our yard, But when we were kids, we couldn't wait for the fruit to get ripe.
No matter where it was.
No matter where it was.
No matter whose it was.
Where it was. Yeah, we raised a tree in a heartbeat.
I want to kind of jump in there. You guys had mentioned the town hall and how you met a lot of people there. What were some of the activities or events that you attended?
You know, I was trying to get to that.
Right.
And I just, the Positive Youth Development Center. You know, we were trying to think of, things for the kids to do. And we came up with this May Day celebration. And they hadn't had a parade in Fairmount Heights for a long time.
Yeah, we used to have Labor Day.
Yeah, so we decided we wanted to do something other than just to have, the parade with cars, and with Steny Hoyer, because Steny Hoyer came to everything. He really was a wonderful representative for us. So we decided that we would have a May Day picnic as well as a parade. And we got the kids and their parents together to make the games. We physically, and we went to all the town businesses and asked them to pay for it, and we would put their name as a sponsor of the little games that we put together. We did about 6 or 7 of them, and so because the town said they didn't have any money to give us, for this, so we knew we wanted to do this day, and we came up with all these games. We're reinventing the wheel. If we had the internet, we would have known right away, but we were making up games that apparently they've been doing for thousands of years, and so we painted all the booths, and we called Cardozo High School and asked if their band would come, and they did. We couldn't believe it. We called Safeway, and they provided sodas, and somebody got a band, and they had a band up there, and they built a bandstand. No, they brought in the bandstand from Park and Planning helped us, and they brought in the roller skating, in the little park area. And we closed off all the cars. It was extremely successful. We had 500 or 600, and we're going to bring those pictures for you because we have pictures. We did this for 3 or 4 years, and somehow, I don't know what happened.
You left town.
Oh yeah, and it kind of stopped. But when it was, when it happened, it was a wonderful thing. And it brought the kids and their parents together. And, they were actually bringing something to fruition. And, we had the police officers there. The street was cut off, and there was lots of food, and it was free. It was free.
And the parades, they used to have, for the Labor Day parades, they used to have a bicycle section. So every kid with a bicycle would end up down at the Five and Dime and see Pleasant buying
We
crepe
had
paper. Yeah, and you put crepe paper all around the wheels and everything. And they had a king, a queen, a bicycle decoration contest. You had the bands. The politicians would come in.
Oh, and remember, there somewhere in one of the heights, somebody had a float.
Oh yeah, it used to be right here on Addison Road.
Yeah, so we got them to let us use the float.
Mm-hmm.
The first one. You should never get as much satisfaction out of something as I did. It was the bomb. It was everything.
Mm-hmm.
You dream of how you want something, and things don't always come together. In fact, I was an event planner later, and so this was my very first event. And when I look back on it, it was picture perfect. No type of problems. The kids all adored it. We didn't have any disruptors coming in. We had music, and I think it might have been pre-hip hop, the first one.
Mm.
And so, it was fun. It was conventional. Contemporary music.
I'm trying to think of the name of the music that
Yeah.
your brother.
Everybody was looking to have a good time, and everybody did. And then it was over. And we saved we used those things for years. And the people who were the dentist and
dentists, doctors.
yeah,
Everybody,
especially from Upland.
Yeah.
But went to Mr. and Mrs. Green, the shoemaker. Oh my God, I missed them. They're a wonderful couple.
Mm-hmm.
And you just think about all the places you went, and we went to Watkins.
That we got the lumber there to build.
So it was truly a community event. We didn't have any money, we didn't have any money, but we had people who were willing to go out. And I apparently am great at begging.
But you mentioned the town hall. The library used to be there.
Yeah.
And
the fire department.
Fire department, police department, the town offices. They had and I've got some pictures of several things that happened in the big room. But they used to have plays there. Mr. and Mrs. Hines used to organize plays. Mr. Harrison. Oh my Lord! There's a guy. The guy used to live in 908. Was a councilman. He was in charge of the recreation council. And the town. As a matter of fact, I've got the agenda for a multi-town conference, and Fairmount Heights staff led it. Okay. He was very active in the Red Cross, especially during the Second World War. They used to have a clinic. We used to have a swimming pool, an actual swimming pool, in where the parking lot is, right across from the new town hall. Where that parking lot is, in the middle of it, they built a wading pool. And we wanted to go in there, and we went over there one day. They didn't have a filtration system. It was just a thing full of water. And what went on in there didn't need to be gotten into. My mother said, "You're not getting in there." So we couldn't.
As kids, yeah. I hear we're jumping back and forth because there's so many memories. We moved out at 60. You were 65, 54 when we moved. So he had 60 years, and I had 35. So 30 years worth of.
We got married in 70.
And we moved in 2004.
And then we moved in.
Yeah, so 34 for me, and there's no way you would lose your minds. We were able to share everything, but there's so many.
But I do have the draft that Buggy Lucas crafted, and I'm working on a piece myself, so.
And he has various other little pieces. We have pictures we want to bring you of the Fairmount, because we need to do something with